Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Creatives Talk. My name is Shanae Miles, and today I have the executive director of Words, Beats, and Life, Mr. Words, Beats, and Life himself, Mr. Mazi Mutafa. So I'm going to bring him on. Welcome, Mazi. How are you?
Very well, very well. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Awesome, awesome. I wanted to start off with something that I see you do in some of your presentations. Ayo!
All right.
Yeah, I I really like that. I love how you engage the crowd. I believe this was the TED talk that I saw that you do that, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. And I really like that. I actually want to, before I get to some of my questions, I want to ask: is that like a form of like hyping? Like I know that like rappers have hype artists, so is that basically hyping?
I mean, it's really rooted in the call and response tradition of
Mm,
multiple African American musical traditions, but it's really, to be honest, it's a way to get a normally quiet, rested and relaxed crowd
mhm.
awake. So, like,
Yeah.
literally saying "Hey yo," and they have to respond. All right, I did it. I haven't done it in a bit because I haven't really presented to very many big crowds lately, but um, it's kind of fun. It's like it's a little rebellious if you're in a space that's supposed to be quiet, like a library or a museum, to get everybody to yell really loud.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I mean, it definitely wakes you up and it keeps people engaged. I when I was watching your TED talk, they immediately responded, and almost I felt like being at a concert. So I can imagine that that particular platform was a very large audience. So it really sounded cool. Um, so I want you to share a little bit about yourself with the audience. Talk to them about who you are, what you do.
For sure. My name's Mazi Mutafa. I'm the founding executive director of Words, Beats, and Life, which is a hip hop nonprofit that I started as a conference at the University of Maryland my junior year when I was the president of the Black Student Union. Um, I had a ton of student leadership experience before I became the Black Student Union president, involved in rallies my freshman year against police brutality, started or was the president of 5 different student organizations other than the Black Student Union, um, pledged Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated um, in my senior year, and have really dedicated my life to the idea that every single human being is an artist, not just a creative, um, not just an artist in the way that we normally think about artists in terms of you must be a musician or you must be a painter, but that so much of what we do is a reflection of ideas that we have that we make real. And there's so this idea of harnessing your creativity to make what is possible reality. And I feel like so much of the reason why I frame it as this idea that we're all artists is because many of us have trauma associated with the practice of making art, especially in a school-based setting where either we were told what we did didn't line up with what the teacher did, or it wasn't as good as whoever was sitting next to us, but it was still a reflection of our greatest ability to take something that we imagine and make it real. And so I'm really dedicated to healing that trauma and recognizing that the same way um, imagination is necessary to create things, it's also necessary to imagine a better world, a better
Mhm.
community. And so I think that awakening that in people is critical to everything else we talk about, from community engagement to civic engagement to economic development. It takes a will to imagine something different.
It does. It does. Thank you so much for sharing that, Mazi. I want to ask this question. This is a famous quote from a movie called Brown Sugar. And the quote is, when did you fall in love with hip hop? So I want you to share with the audience when you fell in love with hip hop.
It's so funny that I remember, I'm a married man now, but there was a point where I was dating, and this woman told me once, I never really imagined that there were really people out there who fell in love with hip hop because I saw it in Brown Sugar, but I never thought it was real until I met you. But what's so funny is I would never describe myself as having fallen in love with hip hop. Not because there's something wrong with that, but because hip hop is something different than like romantic love or just emotion. For me, hip hop has always been a bridge. a bridge between things that I knew and things that I didn't know. And when I think about hip hop, I don't just think about rap music. Um, I think about the racquetball courts in New York City where my grandfather and I used to play handball or racquetball. I think about the road trips from New York City to upstate New York I did with my father, where we'd always stop at a record shop and pick up tapes to play and talk about along the way. I think about the fact that I wasn't going to go to college until I got invited to sit in on a class called African American Studies 202 Blacks in Popular Culture, where they were discussing a book by an author named Trisha Rose, where she described the soundtrack of hip hop and not just the music, but the kind of the sounds of the city that were incorporated into early rap music, whether that was the sound of horns from cars or subway trains, etc. And at that time, I wasn't necessarily super into rap music because I was one of those kids whose household stereo was controlled by my mother, where we listened to James Brown, we listened to Marvin Gaye, we listened to a lot of R&B. So those trips with my father, to those road trips, were an opportunity for us to talk about things that I was beginning to get into. But the truth is, hip hop has always been a part of my life, even when I didn't recognize it as hip hop. So more than something I fell in love with, it's been the soundtrack to my whole life. It's been the the north star of what I could aspire to be and create. It's been so much more than love. It's been the root of my purpose. So like I love the question, but I feel like love is too simple a word to describe how it's always been there. I had a friend back in the day who used to talk about hip hop being her religion, um, in the sense that it was her practice. It was the way that she celebrated creation. Um, and in a lot of ways, I feel similar, knowing that the art I practice is photography or poetry or grant writing, but always showing up as a representative of the
Mhm.
culture, of the community, of the potential.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for saying that. Actually, I want to piggyback off of something that you said about how hip hop reminded you of like some of your family members, and overall, it just was a lifestyle. I was watching this week a documentary by about Kanye West on Netflix, and one of the things that he talked about was his mom. His mom was a English teacher and really got him into literature and he said, it was his mom that really helped inspired him and even mentored him and shaped who he became as an artist. And so I like how you put that, hey, I see hip hop in my life, in my lifestyle, in my upbringing, because it does become it's what shaped you in its various elements. So thank you so much for answering that question. Now going to hip hop, I want to ask when you talk to people about hip hop, when you ask them, what is hip hop? What do they usually say?
Well, two things. One, let me give a quick shout out to Sister Martin, who's tuned in, um, dropping comments in the chat. But second off, I'll be totally honest. I actually don't ask people what they think hip hop is, because I
Mhm.
know I know that 99% of people on planet Earth, when I ask that question, they're gonna answer something about rap music, and I know it's not that. And so rather than begin a conversation or relationship around disagreement, I kind of just skip over that and say what we do and what we work to create, and make the connections that
Mhm.
corporate media hasn't. Like, many people used to complain about the radio talking about the place being the place where hip hop lives, or representing the hip hop community, or etc. And all they did was represent rap music, and oftentimes the most destructive elements of rap music. So rather than begin with difference, I much rather talk to people about things that maybe we have in common. I
Mhm.
love questions like, I was talking to somebody earlier today, and I said one of the things I ask every group of young people I ever go in front of, which honestly are usually young people of color in cities, I ask, how many of you know somebody that went to college?
Mhm.
And usually a couple of hands go up. And then I say, so none of you know your teachers? Because all your teachers went to college, right? Like, every day you're interacting with people who went to this place that you say you don't know anybody that went to. And so I thought the same thing. I never saw my teachers as people who had lives outside of that school building.
Mhm.
Like I knew they literally left, but I had no idea or care what they did outside of it. And I think the same thing is true on some levels of hip hop. The people who are thinking about hip hop as culture or as genre are really just generally thinking, is this music that I like or is this music that
Mhm.
I don't like? Not, you know, why did breaking, which I thought died in the 80s before I was born, suddenly become an Olympic sport? And the answer is because people have continued that tradition outside of the United States. There's of course a vibrant breaking community. Breaking, for those of you who don't know, is the dance element, the original dance element of hip hop culture. Is now an Olympic sport. It's gonna premiere in France. Um, there have been tons of dance competitions happening all over the United States, but if you're not tuned into that, because
Mhm.
it's not on commercial radio or on television, you might not even know that it exists. It's kind of like movies like Love Jones that let
Mhm.
people know that there was this vibrant community of poets, in that case in Chicago, but all over the country. Or movies like
Mhm.
Slam. So media plays a major role in shaping what we know exists and
Mhm.
what we think it means. So
Mhm.
if every place I hear the word hip hop, I hear rap music, then maybe it's natural that I would only think that hip hop is rap music.
Yeah.
But if you're a little older, you know that hip hop is graffiti, hip hop
Mhm.
is DJing, hip hop is rapping, hip hop is breaking, hip hop is knowledge of self. This idea that this form of expression that's usually criminalized or
Mhm.
belittled or rightly put up for critique is just what's on the radio
Mhm.
misses a lot. And so I don't begin with like, what do you think hip hop is? Because I
Mhm.
know that they don't that no one's told them. I might be the first person in their life to be like, no, it's that. It's like I love to quote. This is terrible. I've been doing this for 20 years and I'm still quoting the same rappers. This line from Andre 3000 where he says, "I met a critic and made her message raws. She thought that hip hop was only guns and alcohol." I said, "Oh hell no!" But yet it's
Mhm.
that too. You
Yeah.
can't discriminate because you don't read a book or two. This idea that it is and it isn't.
Mhm.
It's more than that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You actually you went right into one of my other questions, which is great. Which is great. I really like that. And it goes back to how you said that it's that imagination part. So if my imagination is at one place where in my mind I view hip hop this way, and I'm not exposed to other elements of it or even other ways that people are using it or even how diverse it is, then I can't even reimagine the possibility. And I know that's one thing that you always talk about is the importance of reimagining something. Why is it important for us to reimagine how we view hip hop?
Well, I think one of the joys of this work is I still work with young people, and one of the things that I will never tire of is asking them questions that no other adult has ever asked them.
Mhm.
And that is likely because either the adults that are in their lives are not engaging them around the particular topic that I'm engaging them with, and
Mhm.
or that adult themselves has never been asked that question, so they don't think about it. There's a saying that if you say you can or you say you can't, either way, you're right.
Mhm.
This idea that you can speak into your life what is possible, or speak for lack of a better term, speak death into your life.
Mhm.
Like, how are you encouraged to affirm what is possible
Mhm.
in a system that is often trying to tell you what you will be,
Mhm.
not asking you what you want to be, what you could be. um, and I feel like, and more than anything, um, my life has been dedicated to undoing the things that adults did to me as a child.
Mhm.
Part of my story is when I was in middle school, I was dyslexic but undiagnosed. So I always thought it was much better to be bad than to be stupid. So I would
Mhm.
always act up in class. And so at one point, I had a desk in the principal's office. I literally wasn't allowed to go to class. I would show up at school and I would have a desk in his office. And then eventually he got tired of me being there, being frustrated, not knowing how to do work no one was teaching me how to do. So then he
Mhm.
created detention, literally a room that was a giant closet filled with stuff. He cleared it out and built a space for detention. So then I went there every day. Um, and I meet those kids now in
Mhm.
regular schools, whether it's DC or whether it's PG or whether it's someplace else in the world. this idea that kids that are hard to teach
Mhm.
are easy to dispose of.
Yeah.
And I feel like part of my responsibility is to meet those kids and to tell them, like,
Mhm.
I've been you. I've been a version of you. Whether I took it to the extreme that you did or stopped just short, that there are really just a few choices that were made in my life that put me in this chair on this call. And if I just made a couple of different choices, um, what I'd be doing and where I would be totally different. So I empathize. I understand. I understand what it's like to be a part of a system that's failing you,
Mhm.
that is literally preparing you for incarceration, that is
Mhm.
literally preparing you for underemployment, that is literally preparing you to be a permanent underclass. I know what that's like.
Mhm.
And I think that awakening yourself to what is possible, to asking you to dream a bigger dream, to imagine that the conditions you're in right now will not be that way forever and that you
Mhm.
can play a major role in shifting what's possible. Like, that's my whole purpose. My mission is every young person I come into contact with
Mhm.
to awaken them to that. Because that didn't happen for me until college, honestly. And the only reason why I went to college was because I had a high school sweetheart that encouraged me to apply to school because I wasn't going to, because I hated high school. The only thing I enjoyed about it was playing baseball. Um, and I thought college was just like high school, except you live there. And why would I want to
Mhm.
live at a place that I hate? And that class that I was talking about totally changed the way I thought about what education could mean,
Mhm.
what what study could look like, etc. So I want to be that intervention. You know, like
Yeah.
I want to tell a story that makes you be like, I could do something different.
Mhm. Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. And when you mentioned that, one of the things that I like that you talked about was that how you a lot of young people aren't exposed to stuff. So what you're doing is you're saying, okay, I'm going to share this with them. I'm going to show them a different way. And I want to tie this in with a metaphor that you've used on one of your talks, and that was the metaphor of the cipher. Can you explain what a cipher is, and what are those elements in a cipher, and how they're important to community?
Yeah, so hip hop as a cultural practice has multiple principles. We could talk about love, peace, unity, having fun. We can talk about freedom, justice, and equality. We can talk about the roles or the ways in which we reimagine or reconfigure space. So a lot of us have seen people participating in ciphers. Sometimes that cipher is a kind of open circle where whenever someone's at the front of the classroom doing the presentation and their back is to a wall, that would be kind of an open circle, an open half circle or a semicircle, right? But in hip hop, this idea of cipher is something that comes out of Muslim traditions. The word cipher comes from an Arabic or an Urdu word that means zero, cipher, so a circle. The 5% nation, or the nation of gods and earths, was heavily influential on the origins of hip hop or the pioneers of hip hop in New York City. And they introduced that idea of a cipher, this idea of people exchanging knowledge, exchanging energy. And so in the talk that you're talking about, I really borrowed from a good friend, Tony Blackman, who talks about the wisdom of the cipher. And so I talk about the idea of the cipher being a sacred circle of interconnectedness. Why sacred? Because I think that when the practice of creation is divine, whether we're talking about God or we're talking about nature, this idea that it is more than ordinary, right? So maybe divine is too strong. Maybe you say spiritual. Maybe you say you could just say beautiful. The process of creation is beautiful, and so the cipher is a circle of people that has folks in the center of it that are being witnessed by an audience. And usually when people talk about the cipher, they talk about the power of the artist at the center of it. And so what I wanted to do was kind of like I said with the school teachers, to look at what is, but also to take a step back and see what other people might not be paying attention to. Because the cipher is actually not the people at the center. It is the people that are the witnesses. It is the
Mhm.
people that create the space in the center for the dancers or the MCs. to create, to witness um, creativity, and that there's a sometimes we just talk about audiences, right? So we talk about audiences in terms of consumers buying, but also the idea that audiences create a sacred space that is protected for the artist to create. And
Mhm.
I thought my contribution to the dialogue would be to encourage people to recognize that they are essential to that divine or that creative or that beautiful process, because
Mhm.
they are the circle. And without the circle, creativity can happen, but it's kind of like a tree in the forest, you know?
Mhm.
Like if there's nobody there to witness it, did it really happen? Did that epic battle actually happen? Did you hear what he said? Did you hear what she said? Did you hear what they said?
Mhm.
So that recognizing the value and not only being the creator, but also being the witness of creation.
Right, right, right. There's a
I be
quote that
talking that talk. I know I get up on a soapbox. So
oh no, it's oh no, it's fine. It's all good, Mazi. I flow right with you. That's the hip hop approach, right?
mhm, indeed.
There's a quote that says, "You can't build a society purely on interest. You need a sense of belonging,"
Mm,
and that's what hip hop does for people. It gives them a sense of belonging. And going back to the cipher, it's connection. It's, as you stated, it's mutual respect. It's trust. It's understanding. And how do we see that approach in a cipher in our day-to-day lives, or even just the elements of hip or the principles of hip hop in our day-to-day lives?
hmm. I mean, I think it's a good question. I think that a lot of times, at least when I think about hip hop present in people's everyday lives, I think more about technology and about
Mm.
innovation. I think about improvisation. I think about um, the ways in which today, like you mentioned the Kanye West documentary. I think about the roles that our parents play in
Mhm.
encouraging or discouraging us. That idea of speaking death or speaking life into
Mhm.
our lives. Um, I wrote this on Facebook the other day. Every artist deserves a mom like Donda,
Mhm.
because it was amazing to watch her. She remembered his middle school raps and
Mhm.
recite them. This idea that they were so important to her that she memorized them. Um, so I think those are some of the ways we see kind of principles of hip hop
Mhm.
in our lives, in our communities. Um, I think that it's probably still true that young people still can bang out a beat in a cafeteria to be able to get a freestyle going. I think it's still true that young people are innovating in dance all over the
Mhm.
country that could be regional to their regional music. I think that celebrating the creators, the idea that the artist can be one of the most popular kids in school because he,
Mhm.
she, or they made music that people liked or created a painting that moved people.
Mhm.
I think, especially as we think about kind of things that are adjacent to hip hop, like spoken word, um, or something like photography that's been a part of the culture. We promote the idea of chess being a part of hip hop because when hip hop started in those parks, there were also people there doing double dutch and playing
Mhm.
chess. Um, that hip hop isn't, again, it's not this thing that's confined to a space. It is really how we dress, how we speak, uh,
Mhm.
choices about hairstyles. Like it shows up everywhere. It's like the culture of fresh.
Mhm. Yeah. So we're hip hop and we don't even know it. And we have it in our day-to-day lives.
One of my least favorite stories to tell is like when we first started doing this work. I remember I remember one of our teachers asking a student what the nation's capital was, and we're in Southeast DC at the Benning Park Recreation Center, and these are middle school kids we're talking to, and they're like, hmm. And then he said to a student, what's the address of the shrimp boat? And he was like, such and such in South Capitol. And he was like, what do you think that capital in that South Capitol is? I was like, hmm. It's like you live in Washington D.C. This is the nation's capital. Again, like sometimes you can be so close to a thing that you actually
Mhm.
can't see it. There's a quote I love that I was introduced to by a friend, Dr. Jared Ball, by a scholar named McLuhan. He said, I don't know who discovered the ocean, but it probably wasn't the fish. The idea
Mhm.
that sometimes you can be so close to a thing you can't even see it.
Mhm. Yep, no, that's so true. And I want to move on to talking about community. That is a big aspect of hip hop. And specifically, um you talked about how um everybody should have had a mom like Donda, and that impact that a mom like her have. And it's not just a mom. I think it's just people in general. Having a person like that can see a child and say, okay, like you said, acting up. I remember when I was a kid, um, I used to in middle school, I used to act up all the time, and I could write. I really like I was a creative writer, and the way that I would express myself or thought I had to express myself was through uh writing these raps, and I was cussing and all that stuff because that's what I thought rap was.
Mhm.
And I didn't have a person in my life to say, "Hey, you know what? I see that you're good at this, but you don't have to express yourself in this way." And so have if I would have had that at a younger age, who knows? Maybe I would have been a rapper and not a studio programs manager. Not that I don't like the job, but that having a person in your life to see what's in you. And I think the most important aspect of community is investing in the youth, because the youth are the future. But one of the things that you talked about in your TED talk that you did was that we look at investing in youth differently. We view it as how much money do we need to run a program? What's the budget? And we don't view it in something as simple as how do you get them to become leaders? How do you get them to collaborate? How do you get them to co-create or even co-reimagine the way society can be? In your opinion, what do you think that people should do, especially with a lot? There's a lot of young folks. I see a lot of young folks, even at our studio at Project Create, who they love music and they want to be producers and they want to be rappers and singers and all this stuff. But then it's that element of having the I think from an organizational point, sometimes we don't know how to be intentional about helping them to start their career, and pointing them in the right direction. What would you suggest for people who have like a music background and they want to get involved? Sorry, my light went off. And they want to get involved in a startup career. What would you suggest to organizations to kind of help lead youth and invest in them in a different way and not just from a money perspective?
So speaking of talks, I did a talk as a part of another I don't know how to describe it. So you talked about the TED talk. I did another talk about love, and
Hmm.
the crux of the talk was what kind of institutions would we build if people we loved had to use them.
Hmm.
So like if you knew your mother was going to prison, what kind of prison would you want her to go to?
Hmm.
If you knew that um, that your father or your brother or your cousin or even just somebody that you love was going to be homeless and they needed to use the shelters in your city, what kind of shelters would you build for people that you actually loved?
Mhm.
And I think the same thing is true for the programs for people that run organizations that engage with young people. Is if you really love the people that were seeking your help, what kind of help would you give them if you love them? Not just you
Mhm.
had, I got a program design, and so I'm going to do this thing because I think it works, and some people gave me some money. But is there love embedded in that?
Mhm.
Is the goal actually to help them become stronger, more fortified, confident, beautiful dreamers? If
Mhm.
that's the goal, part of what you're going to have to do is listen.
Mhm.
And I think that sometimes that innovation that's a part of hip hop, that kind of on the spot improvisation is critical. And then
Mhm.
the question becomes how do you build improvisation into a process?
Mhm.
And Sister Martin was mentioning earlier the connection between jazz and hip hop. I feel like we need to look to previous musical traditions that were rooted in improvisation.
Mhm.
Um, the way that I would answer the question I just asked is the thing that I built that showed how much I loved young people was to actually not focus on music. the first 7 or 8 years of Words Beats and Life's existence, we didn't have a rap program. And we didn't have a rap program because at that time, everybody and their mother who was running a hip hop program was trying to convince, this is how old I am, was trying to convince kids they could be the next Nelly or the next whoever. And and I just thought it was a dead end. I thought it was a dead end because almost all of the rappers I knew, even the ones that were really committed, were struggling. But most of the producers I knew were actually doing pretty well, making beats to sell to those rappers. Most
Mhm.
of the graffiti artists I knew that were making murals were traveling all over the world, making murals, making communities more beautiful.
Mhm.
Most of the dancers I knew were flying all over the country or catching buses to compete in tournaments because there's a community that's around those things that's not an industry.
Mhm.
And it's like I think that part of the way to think about those young people who want to be producers or who want to be rappers is to not just feed the thing that they showed up interested in,
Mhm.
but to help them see the connection between those things
Mhm.
and other career opportunities. So, for example, um, we do we're really committed to this idea of building a creative economy career pipeline. And
Mhm.
that is the city says that the second highest employment sector after the federal government is the creative sector, but it hasn't invested very much money into programming in schools that would actually prepare DC youth to participate in those jobs. Instead, it spent money on marketing to bring people from all over the country to DC to set up shop and create
Mhm.
businesses that again bring in more people from outside of DC to participate in those businesses. But what if young people who've got their own ideas and their own abilities could actually be empowered to become creative leaders in this community? If they were
Mhm.
the future interns, the future stage workers, the future writers whose work is being put up all over the city. What if every single school in Washington D.C. I'm gonna give you all my fun facts. Like I love to ask who is the number one owner of theater space in Washington D.C. Some people will be like, oh, it's the Kennedy Center. Oh, it's Arena Stage. No, it's D.C. Public Schools is the number one owner of theater space in Washington D.C. What if every single school had a theater club that was about
Mhm.
putting actors on the stage, but
Mhm.
also training people to do lighting and sound, to do set design, that they could activate those theaters and use them for more than assemblies? What would the city look like if we actually had creative pipelines for young people to do things in high school,
Mhm.
ideally go to college, work in the city that they were born in? What,
Mhm.
what would that look like? I mean, to be honest, what it would look like is someplace like it would look like some of the other major cities that DC always has a chip on his shoulder for being compared to, right? But
Mhm.
if you want to grow hometown talent, you got to invest in hometown institutions.
Right.
And so those are some of my answers about what I would build and what I would say to those young people. I would say that there's a lot of careers connected to these crafts. If
Mhm.
you're great as an MC, you might be a great host. You might be
Mhm.
a great DJ on a radio show or a podcast. You
Mhm.
might be a great writer. You might be someone who you might be a great researcher. You could be a good copy editor. There's so many things that are so many jobs connected. If it's emceeing, you could be a great videographer, a great lighting
Mhm.
designer, a great um, like there's so many jobs.
Mhm.
But our children are encouraged the way other people's children are encouraged to become engineers and doctors, to become
Mhm.
rappers and athletes. Like I get it because we see those people being successful.
Mhm.
But if you want to be an athlete, think about all the other jobs that are connected to sports in America.
Mhm.
Broadcasting to kinesiology to physical therapy to medicine. Like there's all these things that could have you be a part of this world without needing to be the person on the stage, because usually the person on the stage has the shortest career of all the people in the room.
Mhm. Right, right. I really, really like that. For me, I remember when I was younger, going back to this rapping, I wanted to be, believe it or not, I may not look like it. I wanted to be an international rap star. And that was just like my aspiration. And I remember I was talking to this guy at my church at the time, and I was like, "Yeah, I want to be an international rapper and all this stuff." And he was like, "Well, do you know anything about sound?" And I was like, "No." And he was like, "Have you ever worked a sound bar?" I said, "No." And I remember this. I will never forget this day. He let me sit in his chair, well, in his chair, and run sound for the church service. Well, that opportunity for me ended up opening up just a new love for just audio visual in general. So I started learning sound. I started learning video. And then I ended up getting was able to get a job because of the stuff that I did at my church. And then from there, ended up running the media team, and then establishing a career, and then breaking off into so much that it was that one interest in music, and having that person again say, okay, well, I know that you want music, but learn this. That is very important. I do like how you said that it would be nice if schools would say, all right, we're going to start a theater and maybe create this big vocational program where, hey, you're learning about sound. You're learning about lighting. You can play instruments. Okay, get into scoring. Um, that's important. And I think one of the biggest things about hip hop, especially when hip hop first started, was it was all about innovation. They were people who started innovative. They were innovative. Something as simple as the turntable. That was a mistake, but it ended up becoming an innovative mistake, and then it turned into something so big. And that's like you said, it goes back to how we see hip hop in so many different things, and that innovative part, the community part, the uh, investing part, all of that, it makes up what society should look like and what we should always aim for.
Real quick, I just want to give a shout out to my cousin who just wrote, good question. Even more so, would you use the programs and services that you're offering? So I feel like that's an awesome question. I hope we answered that. But the thing about that innovation you're talking about, part of the challenge, particularly for Americans who don't necessarily have like historical frames or references outside of the United States, like the idea that the origins of hip hop as a culture is the DJ, which then leads to an innovation of something that was happening in Jamaica called toasting,
Mhm,
where the kind of hype man would talk about how great the DJ was. Like that wasn't the innovation was thinking about how to use those tools that existed in another context.
mhm,
DJing was happening in Jamaica, how to do that differently and how to
mhm,
respond to the needs of the audience. And we talk about like where does hip hop show up in our lives when you're a person that's in leadership of something, and the people who you're trying to serve respond and say we need something different. Like that's DJ Cool Herc in the
mhm,
park playing music and realizing that particular parts of the song are what the dancers liked the most. So he kept giving them more and more and more of what they wanted. This idea of hip hop as a practice representing a strategy for responsive leadership.
mhm,
There's violence happening in the community. Let's get the moms and the pops, the grandparents and the kids to come out to a park jam and promote peace. Let's celebrate going back to school. The very first party that was thrown in hip hop was a back to school jam organized by the sister of DJ Cool Herc, one of the first women to be erased in hip hop. But she
mhm,
wasn't the last. One of the things that I got a chance to see an academician do a presentation about DJ Cool Herc, Africa Bambaataa, Grandmaster Flash, and I think it was just those three. But she was talking about how originally, at least two of those DJs I mentioned borrowed the music of their mothers. Africa Bambaataa, when he would borrow his mother's record, he literally wrote her name on the record because after the park jam, he needed to return it. So, like, part of the mythology of hip hop is that these great men, some of whom are of West Indian ancestry, created something out of nothing. But just like me, their mothers were in charge of the music in their houses too. So
mhm,
Bambaata's mother's musical taste was eclectic. That informed his taste. The same thing is true for Herc. So like we got to recognize that everyone comes from a family, and which is the reason why I didn't say a person. I said everyone deserves a mother
mhm,
like Donda, because I agree with you. I don't have any children, so I am a person that's in people's
mhm,
lives. But I also know the real value of having my mother in my life
mhm,
to be invested in my success and to be so invested in it that she would make sacrifices for it to be possible. And I think that yes, we all deserve a person, but I really wish every creative, and
mhm,
remember I define everybody as an artist. I
mhm,
wish everybody had a mother that loved what you did so much that she memorized it to remind you of what you said. And not because that's so much better. A mother or a father or a parent is so much better than a Mazi. But your mother's in your house every day. I'm not. I'm gonna see you a few hours a week. And so this idea, and I'm only driving this point home because I feel like I'm part of a generation that witnessed most of my friends come up in single family homes. But a lot of my friends now are married with children, and they're the kind of parents that we all wished we had had, the kind of intact families. And so, like, just encouraging young people that want to build families to be able to do that and to recognize that parents can really play a role in lifting up their children's aspirations.
Yes, thank you so much. Now, I want to switch gears and I want to ask you about your organization. I hope something's happening. Okay. Uh,
Chrissy's in the
had a
chat.
little.
Chrissy, you gotta pay the light bill over there.
Yeah, so I want to ask you about your organization, Words, Beats, and Life. You
Mhm.
touched a little bit on um, what you were doing while you were at the University of Maryland, but you had a conference that you were hosting, and from the conference, you got this idea. What was that?
Well, so it's a little embarrassing, but most of the things I've really done in my life were not my idea. They were someone else's suggestion that they didn't really have the time to do. So my vision for Words, Beats, and Life was to create a nonprofit just to keep doing that hip hop conference at the University
Mhm,
of Maryland. Like I said, undergraduates had a different idea, but I remembered this DC public school teacher who came and said, "So what are we gonna do next, Mazi?" And I was like, "I don't know. I'm just a college student thinking about campus." But I remembered her when that opportunity to go in a different direction emerged. And so we created what we then called the Saturday Arts Academy, which was supposed to be a once a month volunteer opportunity at the Benning Park Recreation Center
mhm,
to teach young people the elements of hip hop. But that year, well, when we founded the nonprofit, we spent a year doing research, looking at what other people were doing and
mhm,
deciding what we would do and what we wouldn't do, why we decided we weren't going to focus on rap music. Um, but that year there was a crime emergency, and I had a
mhm,
friend who now is the president of a foundation named Retta Morris, who reached out to me and said, "Mazi, are you all still running that program at the Benning Park Recreation Center?" And I was like, "Yeah." She said, "Well, the city wants to do midnight basketball programs and pay for programming to happen in rec centers. If we were able to give you a grant, would you be able to ramp that programming up?" And I was like, "Yeah." Because I never imagined that this job I do could be a job. I thought it was always going to be, this would be my give back, that this would be
mhm,
my volunteering in the community. But then there became an opportunity to create jobs for people and not just ask hip hop artists to come and share their gifts and talents because they're valuable, but to also compensate them so that so that they could also be examples to the young people of when you're committed to your craft, you actually reap rewards from it. Like
mhm.
it's okay to do good. It's also okay to do well. And so
Yes.
there were artists who were working at Starbucks. And when we hired them to become our teachers, they didn't have to do Starbucks anymore. They could be a working artist and a teaching artist. And that was now their whole career. And that allowed them to do other things. And I think that the understanding when you reach out to an artist with an opportunity that doesn't include compensation, when it's your job to call them, to ask them to be a part of that opportunity, I think it's foul. I still to this day have people call and be like, "Hey, we've got this opportunity for exposure for your kids," and I'm like, "We don't give our kids exposure. We cut checks because we are investing in their ability to do things like buy the materials that they need to be an artist. They need to
Mhm,
buy turntables. They need to be able to pay for music. They need to pay for like none of those things are free. They can't show up with your opportunity for exposure at Blick and be like, "Hey, see this exposure I got? Can I get some free stuff from here?" So like this idea of destroying the idea of the starving artist as
mhm.
okay. Like the
Yeah.
people that inspire us to dream bigger, these are the people that we want to starve, while people that design weapon systems to kill people all over the world live in mansions and yachts. We have to challenge the things that are kind of agreed to craziness. within our society. And I think, like I said, I think a part of that is waking the person that designed that weapon system to speak life, to speak death into people's lives, that they could actually use that same creative brilliance to think about how to make food available to everyone, to how to make housing available to everyone, to how to educate everyone with a quality education and a career or a job or a
Mhm.
practice that feeds their souls, their family, and their community. Like, there's more than enough resources to be kind, to
Mhm.
build systems that are rooted in our love for each other, not our fear of each other, not our hatred of each other, but our actual to the bone love for our fellow human beings, because we recognize the potential that they have to be that person that motivates others, that inspires others. Like, we got to really build systems that do that. And if we're operating in systems that don't do that, we gotta question whether or not our systems are replicating the oppression that we say we're fighting. We got
Mhm.
to ask ourselves whether or not giving young people the things that they say that they want. Um, Shout out to Timothy Banks for talking about compensating the artists. 100. Um, we got to question the systems that we're building if they're not affirming love and life and creativity and imagination. If the kids that come through your program are not better
Mhm.
and better, and I'm putting up the quote marks, but I really mean better, like as in more well, like
Mhm.
having healed from trauma, maybe not totally healed, but on the way to healing, having some tools to
Mhm.
be able to deal with the trauma that we know that they have experienced. Like, I did a teacher training earlier this year. My first time doing a teacher training in at least in during the COVID era, and I had a teacher in front of her peers say that she has to constantly remind herself not to tell her students that they're not going to be anything. She has to actually remind herself. This is a person that's dedicated their lives to teaching. I'm guessing primarily children of color. That she has to remind herself not to speak death into their lives. Who is taking care of our children? Who is nurturing the future of our communities? Why are wounded people allowed to wound others? This is the question I feel like artists and creatives and imaginative people, leaders, have to tackle.
Mhm.
What are the systems that we are maintaining, producing, or reproducing? Anyway, I'm sorry. You got more questions.
Oh no, that was really good. I mean, but at the end of the day, what it boils down to, I think, is it's that love element, and you talked about that. Um, love, leading with love, building with love, creating with love, and I think the creative industry, we have a freedom, and that freedom is to be able to communicate and build something different and express ourselves with no limitations. And the unfortunate part is that, like you said, we're also battling a system, and so there's certain things in the system that's put in place. But I really like your concept. It is important for people to uh, be able to have life spoken into, especially our young people. Um, for as much as we say that we want to see our young people do good, we don't really invest a whole lot. And we do leave them to fend themselves. So, organization such as your organization is important. Can you share, and you don't necessarily have to name any specific person, but can you share an example of how your program has transformed someone's life?
Yeah. So I think a couple things. I'm gonna answer the question, but I wanna lead up just a little bit. I know we're almost out
Mhm,
of time, but I think that idea that children are the future was a great song in
mhm,
in in the '80s. Children are the present. They are
mhm,
really, especially when empowered, to
mhm,
recognize that their leadership opportunity doesn't require me to retire, because I'm not retiring for like another 30, 40 years. So like, I don't need to get out the way for you to step up.
mhm,
I want to be a witness to your leadership. I want to be a supporter of your leadership. And you don't have to get a degree and you
mhm,
don't have to have a job. What all I need from you is to understand for yourself how the world needs to be different
Mhm.
because you have different needs that are not being met, and be able to share those. So they don't have to be
Mhm.
super articulate. You could just
Mhm.
be like, there was a little ways back, there's an organization called Critical Exposure, and they had their students do a campaign about water fountains in public schools and how many of them had lead that was being included in the water, right? Because they were old water fountains.
Mhm.
I want clean water. That's that that's a clear enough articulation of the fact that you don't have it. I want access to books in my school that were produced after 1995. You know, I want textbooks that don't just tell the story that Texas wants me to know.
Mhm.
Um, and so I can think of lots of young people who have told us about the impact. I always go back to the beginning though. So like we just did an interview with one of our first students. His name's Marte Garner. Marte was literally the student that had a light switch turn on in my brain, because I wasn't really confident when we first started that we could really teach kids to be great artists. I thought we could engage them, we could keep them out of trouble, we could kind of be big brothers and big sisters to them, be mentors, because I didn't know that they would actually commit the time that it would take to become great artists. And Marte,
Mhm.
him along with another DJ named DJ Trey Pound, they both showed up every day. We were at the Benning Park Recreation Center. They learned how to set up the turntables. They asked when we were doing block parties. They were the first students we ever took out of DC, took them to San Francisco to be a part of a conference. Both of their first times on a plane, first time visiting a college that wasn't in the DMV. And before all of that, both of them had said they were never leaving Benning Park. They had no aspirations to be anything more than what they saw. And after that, the sky was the limit for both of them. And I think that creating opportunities for young people to do things that a lot of adults take for granted, like I'm sure you've been lots of different places, but I'm sure that many of the young people that come to your program, many might not have ever left DC, might not have never left their neighborhood. And so
Mhm.
this idea of tearing down invisible walls that prevent our young people from recognizing that the whole city, the whole region, the whole country, the whole planet, and eventually maybe the whole universe is their birthright. Access to it, not ownership of it, but access to it,
Mhm.
the ability to take their talents wherever they want to go and not be trapped in big air quotes in wherever it is that they were born. Um, I feel like I feel like that's our responsibility as adults to have conversations about where you've been, where you want to go. I don't know. I've never been no place. You can, with the internet, you can take them all kinds of places. Tons of videos on YouTube to show them places they never even knew existed. You know, and I think that travel and that exposure to things you don't know is the best education most people will ever receive, because it's
Mhm.
learning from the people in those places that's going to change the way you look at where you live, what's
Mhm.
possible in your city, because you see
Mhm.
other people did it. I can do it too.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. So now we're going to open it up for some questions. So if anybody has a question for Mazi, please feel free to add it to the chat. While we're waiting for questions, Mazi, I wanted to ask, what does the future look like for Words, Beats, and Life? Are you guys working on anything big? I saw something on your website about I believe it was the 2040 vision.
Yeah. So COVID allowed us to do a lot of different things. I was actually just talking to my marketing manager today about, and I didn't even realize this till I was talking to her, that many of us who were just direct service providers have suddenly become media companies. And I was talking to her about, like, how come we're not doing more talk about our podcast, our blog, our various shows that we're doing? Like, why aren't we talking about ourselves as a media production company, not just, a hip hop after school program? So one of the things that COVID allowed us to do is we did a global gathering back in 2020 of 60 people who we've worked with around the world for 3 different think tanks about building a vision for the next 20 years of the organization, because we were preparing to turn 20 years old, which we turned this year. Um, And out of that came what we call the Vision for 2040 document. And I'm super excited that Words Beats and Life was part of the 7% of applicants who applied to the NEA for the Biden COVID relief fund money. We got a $100,000 grant and are creating a national fellowship. We're launching it on March the 1st, where we want people who see themselves in that 2040 vision or things that they would want to work towards creating to make things in that 2040 vision
Mhm.
happen by becoming fellows at Words Beats and Life and spending the next 9 months participating in trainings, but getting some money to be able to do the thing that they imagine. Like investing in adults. We've got almost 2 decades of investing in kids and investing in teaching artists. Well, why don't we invest in some creatives, maybe who are lawyers or run some other business, but have never really stepped out there in their creative space, who are part of the hip hop community, to be able to create something that makes the world better for other people. So I love it that Christy is like, yo, nobody's asking Mazi questions. I got a question.
Yes, she does. She says, as an executive director, what keeps you going? What's the secret to your longevity?
Um, so there's no real secret. I mean, ultimately, I just made a decision a long time ago that this is not my job. And I proved that to myself in the times where we were broke, waiting on funders to pay us, and I still showed up at work. Or I went without a check and paid my people so that my people could still make sure their lights were on and
Mhm.
they didn't have to live on top ramen. Um, and that we made decisions about, um, again, what kind of system would we build if we love them? Like, if like it's cool to love kids.
Mhm.
What about the adults who work at your shop? How much do you love them? What are you willing to sacrifice for them? And so, like, for me, I don't have a job. I have a family. And
Mhm.
my job is as the head fundraiser is to make sure we have the resources so that people don't have to do bad to do good, that they
Mhm.
can do well and do good. And so, like, I'm super invested in every intern that comes through our doors, every contractor that we hire, every teaching artist, every young person, every parent, every adult that goes through our Airbnb experiences. I believe, again, like, this isn't my job, it's my purpose. Like, some people talk about having a ministry. Like, if you could really argue that this work is my ministry, because anybody that's watching right now or will watch it later, the only thing that I hope happens is that you be inspired to recognize that there's people in this world who you ain't never heard of, who are
Mhm.
working tirelessly on your behalf, for you, for your children, for your grandchildren, to build a world that we all deserve. And I'm just one of those people. And so Words Beats in Life is my vehicle to do that. But like, this work is my purpose.
Hmm.
It's why God put me on this earth.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I like that. Mazi, like I think you're like I think this is probably by far one of my I've done only 4 so far. This is my 4th one, but this is probably one of my favorite talk. You have so much information, and I can feel your passion, and I can feel your love. This is not just a job. This is like you said, it's purpose. It's changing people's lives, and that's how you bridge the gap. You provide that hip hop approach, and the hip hop approach builds those gaps. It tears down those systems, and it creates the world the way that it should be, or the way that we can reimagine it being.
I agree, and I think Timothy asked the question, "Where's hip hop going to be in 10 years?" And I love quoting my favorite rapper. So it's still most deaths. People ask, "What do you think about hip hop? Where's it going?" And he said, "People, hip hop is going to be so hip hop is going to be where the people are." But I think that on some levels that's 100% true, and on some levels not so much because of corporate influences. But here's what I'll tell you: 3 years ago, I declared, was it 2019? I think it was either 2019 or 2020. I declared that the year of the woman in rap music, because it was the first time in my life that I could listen to commercial radio and hear songs that were made in that year by 3 different women back to back. And so I think that where hip hop is going, I think, is where women are allowed to tell fuller and richer stories. That there can be a Rhapsody along with a Meg the Stallion. That it's not about It's about trying to get back to something that resembles balance. But I also think because of things like the Olympics and things like breaking, and then the idea of turntablism and graffiti, because there's mural festivals all over the world, that hip hop, what I hope in the next 10 years is that all those elements come back together, that they reconnect like Voltron and transform our schools, transform our libraries, transform our prisons. And I know we're at time, but I think that that's what I hope, is that getting more visibility to these things will actually allow all of them to speak more life into our communities, more words beats in life.
I like that. I like that. Thank you so much, Mazi. Before we end, how can people stay connected with you?
The easiest thing, just Google words beats in life. We're on all the platforms, including LinkedIn, YouTube. Please follow our YouTube page. We got a ton of content over there. So all social platforms. We got a TikTok channel we're about to take to another level with these 3 poet laureates. So follow us on TikTok too. New content coming.
Yes, and Mazi is not wrong. They have a lot of great content. Go check it out on their YouTube page. Thanks again, Mazi, and thank you everyone for joining another episode of Creatives Talk. Please make sure to stay connected with Project Create on our Instagram page and Facebook at Project Create DC, or you can visit our website at projectcreatedc.org. Thanks again, and you all have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Bye.